Welcome to English 2450, COM 2010, Intro to Film, Week 3, Lecture 3 on Visual Design. In this video, I'm going to be talking about two of the important pieces of mise-en-scène, or putting into the scene, which are color and the illusion of depth. Color and the illusion of depth. If you've made it this far in your lectures, congratulations. There will be a 2-point extra credit question on next week's quiz after our lighting unit. And the secret code for extra credit is Academy Awards. The secret code for extra credit is Academy Awards. So let's get started by talking about color. Now, a lot of the basics of color are probably things you learned in an elementary art class, but I do want to go over them just to remind you of some of the terminology and to specifically think about how filmmakers use color to convey and create meaning within film. So, color theory is kind of a practical guidance to how to mix colors and create different visual effects using color combinations. So this is where we get terms like warm and cool colors, complementary and split complementary colors, primary and secondary colors. So let's take a look real quick at an example from week 3, images, clips, and links. If we scroll back up here, this is a color theory chart. So you have the basic color wheel, which includes, all of your primary and secondary colors. Primary colors, yellow, blue, and red. Secondary colors, green, orange, and purple, which are created by mixing primary colors together. You've got warm colors and cool colors, which are something we'll probably talk about a bit more in class. And then complementary colors are colors that exist opposite from each other on the color wheel. So yellow goes with purple, orange goes with blue, and red goes with green. And presumably these are colors that are visually pleasing when you put them together, when you put them next to each other, because of how they're positioned on the color wheel. Now, if you take a more complex version of the color wheel with more kind of different shades here, there's also something called split complementary, where rather than the complementary color being the one that's directly across, it's the two on either side. So you have these triangles where this yellow color is complementary with this sort of fuchsia and this dark violet. And the teal color is complementary with the kind of tangerine and the bright red. So over here on the right-hand side, you have these trios that go together as part of the split complementary color combination. And this is how you can start building a color palette, is by taking 3 complementary colors here and kind of expanding to include different shades of these colors, and they all kind of work together very nicely visually. So that's like a very kind of basic look at how color theory operates. It takes a color wheel and it looks at complementary colors and how they work together to create a visually pleasing kind of aesthetic palette. So if you scroll down here, I have a link to a YouTube video about how filmmakers manipulate our emotions using color. I would like you to watch that at some point when you have time. It does a very good job kind of succinctly explaining how color is used to convey ideas and meanings and change our interpretations of a particular mise-en-scène. And I also have 2 links here that I want to take a look at that I think are really interesting. The first one is Cinema Palettes. Now, this is a Twitter that's unfortunately no longer active, where a film fan would put together these really beautiful palettes, color palettes, based on a film by looking through the film and figuring out which colors are most commonly used. So the color palette for 1961's Breakfast at Tiffany, you have these very kind of soothing blues and pinks and some kind of neutral olive colors in there as well. The color palette for the film Maleficent from 2014 is much kind of darker, right? You've got these navy blues, these dark blacks, olive greens, kind of mauve and burgundy type colors. And if you scroll through, you can see other examples of color palettes from comedies, from classical Hollywood, from dramas, from horror films, and it really gives you a sense of how directors use color to convey different ideas in different types of films. So this is a really, really interesting Twitter, and you can scroll back and look through the palettes he's created and kind of get a sense of how directors use color to convey meaning in film. Now, the other link I've included here is for what's called average colors. Now, this was also created by a film fan. And what they did is they watched through films, and with each individual shot, they took the average color from that shot, the color that covers the biggest percentage of the screen in any given shot. And they created a striation, a thin line with that color, and watch through the entire film to show how the color palette changes over the course of the film. So let's just take a look at the average color pattern for WALL-E. At the beginning of the film, it's very brown, black, neutral. And this is when WALL-E is still on Earth in this kind of post-apocalyptic wasteland. And then you can start to tell when the film moves away from WALL-E and into the space station, because the colors get brighter and cleaner, right? So you can actually see how the narrative shifts based on the difference in how color palettes are used over the course of the film. Another really interesting example here is from the film Finding Nemo. Now, Finding Nemo, unsurprisingly, there's a lot of blue because most of the film takes place in the ocean. But you also get these weird patches here where it's incredibly dark. And these are the parts of the movie where they're incredibly deep in the ocean, so you have less light. So this is a really kind of interesting way to visualize how color is used to tell a story, how it changes throughout the course of a film, and how these color palettes can tell us something about particular films in an unexpected way. So obviously color is very important to how films are put together, to mise-en-scène, and we want to think more this semester about how color conveys meaning in film. So that's something to continue thinking about, is why do directors choose certain colors for their settings, for their costumes, for their makeup, for other aspects of their mise-en-scène, and what do those colors convey to us? Now, another important piece of mise-en-scène is the illusion of depth. And I say the illusion of depth because all films are projected onto a flat two-dimensional screen. So in order for us to believe that the thing we are being shown on this flat two-dimensional screen is actually a three-dimensional world, directors have to do a very careful job of creating the illusion or the impression that there are masses, that there is volume, that there are edges that exist within this three-dimensional world, that there are planes, and that there is volume. So directors have to do a lot of work to create this illusion of depth. One of the first things you need to know before you can understand how that illusion is created is that there are three planes in any given shot of a film, and that's the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. So I'm going to pull up an example here. Now, this image is taken from the film Citizen Kane, which is one of the first films that ever truly used foreground, middle ground, and background to their full potential. And this is because filmmaker Orson Welles was very invested into creating that depth of focus where we can fit a lot of visual information into the screen. So here we have the foreground, which is the plane that's closest to the film, the middle ground, which is the plane that's the middle distance away from the camera, and then the background, which is the plane that is furthest away from the camera. And we have three figures here existing in the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. So those are the three kind of planes that you would expect to see in any shot of a film. And because we have these three planes, we can have objects overlap on those different planes. And if objects overlap on those different planes, that shows us that it has to be a three-dimensional space that we're seeing. The other two depth cues are the things that create the illusion of a three-dimensional world, are aerial perspective and size diminution. Now, aerial perspective is typically an outdoor shot where we show the most distant plane, the background plane, in a kind of hazy or fuzzy, out of focus type of shot so that you know that it's further away than the things that are closer and clearer. And size diminution is where figures are further away from the camera and thus they are smaller. And the figures that are closer to the camera are obviously larger. So I have some examples here. This is an example of aerial perspective. We know that the further away from the camera we get, the more out of focus and blurry individual objects are going to be. So this building back here we know is further away from the camera than this building right here because this is clearer to us. So that's an example of aerial perspective. Size diminution, this first example is also from the film Citizen Kane, where we know that the men sitting at the table are existing in a three-dimensional space because the further we get away from the camera, the smaller they are. So this man appears larger than this man. And it's not because if you put man A and man B next to each other, one would be 2 feet tall and one would be 6 feet tall, obviously, right? We expect that because this is a three-dimensional space, further away from the camera means smaller. And then another example from the film, the Hudsucker Proxy. This is an office space. The further we get away from the camera, the smaller the objects appear, to the point where you can't even make out individuals here at the front of the room. And then the larger objects are closer to the camera. So we know that this is a long and narrow space. This gives us an illusion of depth. So even though this is two-dimensional, the screen of my laptop is two-dimensional, the screen of the movie theater is two-dimensional, I can tell that this is a three-dimensional space because I can see the perspective and I can see the diminution of size of objects on this screen. So the reason why this is important is because deep focus filmmaking, which was kind of initially invented by Orson Welles in Citizen Kane, is one way that filmmakers can take advantage of depth cues and deep focus compositions to create the illusion of 3 dimensions of space. And they can fit more visual information within the mise-en-scène if they make good use of staging, of the foreground, middle ground, and background, of size diminution or aerial perspective, to inform the viewer that all of these things are occurring within the same 3-dimensional space, and that the relative size and position of the objects within that mise-en-scène are telling us something important about how that space is laid out. So thank you very much for sticking around for all 3 videos. Of course, if you have any questions about the content, feel welcome to email me or send me a message via Canvas, and we will do a short review session at the beginning of class on Wednesday if you have any additional questions for me then. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in class.